Welcome to the Asia Society. Let me thank President Kim Ki-hwan, a very good friend of mine, and Danny Russell for inviting us to this panel. This panel is going to be focusing on economic security and technology, an issue which I know nothing about, and that's why they chose me as the moderator, to be as objective as possible. And it's also great to see old friends. Sumi, I've known for a long, long time. And Daddy, of course. I've known Ambassador An for, I guess, over 25 years. President Kim Ki-hwan I've known for like nearly 30 years. Just gives you a ballpark figure of how old I am and how long we've been in this business. It was great to see also Allison, whom I had not seen for many years. So the topic that we just covered is politics and geopolitics and what Korea will do. And before I go into this particular session, I just wanted to give two personal views on the issue. First of all, on Taiwan, and whatever the ROK government does, whether it's the current government or whatever government comes down the road, I think domestic politics will play a critical role in how much Korea will help either the U.S. indirectly or Taiwan directly, especially if it concerns military aid. In other words, political issues will become really, really crucial in determining the extent to which the ROK can help the U.S. I hope they will, but I think it'll be dependent upon politics. The second thing is, obviously, from an American perspective, you would want a Korean government that is really, I guess, keen on strengthening U.S. ROK Japan ties, as it is happening now with the Yoon government. And I agree absolutely what the government has done. But the purpose of the alliance is not to make sure that favorable governments come in. It's basically making sure that you're able to maintain ties despite really wrenching domestic politics. And so whatever happens after 24 in the U.S. election, whatever happens to Korea after April 2024, when we have critical National Assembly elections, that will have a huge impact on how the alliance basically is maintained. So I really want to emphasize the enormous importance of domestic politics within the alliance system that we have talked about earlier. So as we then shift from politics to technology, we have a number of really great speakers today. I'm not saying this because I'm moderating this session, because it just happens to be true. So on my immediate right, whom I've just met, you can read her CV later on, folks. Dr. Edlyn Levine is Chief Science Officer and co-founder of America's Frontier Fund. She is a Harvard PhD in physics. So it just tells you that when she talks about particularly defense-related technologies, she's not just talking from a policy perspective, but from a science and technology perspective. Right next to her is Dr. Son Ji-won from KIST. For those of you who do not know what KIST is the Korea Institute for Science and Technology. It was the first government-funded think tank founded, over nearly 50 years ago?
Yeah, it was 1966.
66, right? And at that time, I think it was under the Johnson administration, they wanted to provide a major loan to the Korean government to begin a huge initiative. And President Park Chung-hee at that time, amongst many options, said, we have to create a science and technology institution. And many people in the government were against it because Korea at that time was basically a farming economy. So they said, how can you sustain this advanced technology institute? And anyway, so basically what it has become now is Silicon Valley in one building. And so she basically heads the center within KIST that focuses on policy. On her right is Professor Lee Jaemin. He has several hats now. He's a law professor at the Seoul National University, ambassador for economic security issues, and a watcher and practitioner of trade policy and economic issues for the last 25 years plus. Last but not least, the person on our far right is Mr. Sang Soo. He's the vice president of SK Hynix, and he's been in the U.S. for like 15 or so years. He probably knows Washington, D.C. better than any lobbyist in Washington. He really works closely with the U.S. government in many respects. And of course, he's the only one amongst the panel here who is interested in making money. So this is, after all, what Hynix and others are interested in. What I want to do is, for the first round, just tell us briefly, and I mean really briefly, in like 2 minutes or so, what is the most important issue from where you stand as far as technology is concerned? Over to you.
Very good question. So I want to thank you as our moderator and all of you for being here. This is a very important dialogue, and our first panel really set up the national security framework for us to really build this technology conversation on. To answer your question, there are actually 3 trends that I want to begin with, the last of which will be the technology trend. But the first is understanding that now the world has changed to the point where the United States, early in relations with opening to China, had made the assumption that free markets would lead to free people. And we have for several decades been running on that hypothesis. And that has created a tremendous amount of global economic commerce, economic growth, technology growth, and has lifted hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people out of poverty. Right? It has been a tremendous tour de force over several decades. But we now have a concern, as we've discussed in the previous panel, that in that economic rise of China in particular, we have an economic and technology competitor which is challenging the rules-based order that has brought about an unprecedented level of peace in the world. And that's a concern. And that the recent pivot on this challenge between the United States and China is in fact recent. That's over the past, half decade. Whereas multinational companies, right, U.S. companies, South Korean companies, Taiwanese companies, many of them have been going on this premise of deeper economic integration into China, as with the blessing of policymakers, right, that this was a good thing. And now to have a sudden pivot, right, we need to actually work an open dialogue and discourse with how to shape the ensuing years to make sure that our interests from an economic point of view align with our interests in a values point of view for individual liberty, rules-based order, national sovereignty going forward. So that's the first observation. The second observation, and this is projected onto technology in particular, is that there is no such thing as a small country. If you look in particular with semiconductors, when we decide and define collaboration and policies around semiconductor trade, exchange of technology and ideas, there are countries that are relatively small that punch well above their weight, right? And you look at the relationships that the United States has built with Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, the Netherlands. This is where this idea that this is a superpower competition, that China and the United States are the only countries that matter, absolutely thrown out of the window. The last observation, this is getting to the core of your point, which is the role that technology plays. I was very happy to hear your comments that the Korea Foundation is expanding the aperture to consider technology, because that is front and foremost in terms of what's at stake. Here we go. It wasn't my phone. What's at stake going forward?
That must have been a Samsung phone.
It was definitely a Samsung phone. Definitely a Samsung phone. So, but if you think at what's at stake with regard to technology and technology leadership, it is absolutely vital for Korea, for the U.S., for our allies who actually aspire to maintain these values of rules-based order, liberty, sovereignty going forward, that we lead in technology. Because if we don't lead in technology, we will not be able to lead in values. And if you think our discussions about nuclear weapons, right, that was a watershed that was crossing the Rubicon in terms of creating a technology that fundamentally changed global policy for the future history of humanity going forward. Right? That was the first time where we really, really realized that technology and policy are interlinked in a fundamental level. Going forward, you think about, for example, digital technologies. Are we going to, with increased digital integration, live in an authoritarian digital panopticon where we lose our liberty, where our data is not held in privacy, that we're monitored all the time? Or are we actually going to figure out as democracies how to make that integration healthy, how we're going to regulate appropriately those emerging technologies? That's in the digital domain. What about, the discussions about the Taiwan Strait? Mare liberum, this principle of freedom of seas, freedom of navigation that has led to so much global trade, that also requires an ability to maintain a technology base deployed in the sea. And South Korea, with its shipbuilding industry, plays a very, very critical role in that. When we think about telecommunications, the ability, again, to integrate technologies that are not actively monitoring our dialogues and influencing our democratic discourse is important. You think about projecting into space. Is space going to become an increasingly contested and militarized zone, or are we going to keep it as a peaceful zone for global commerce to grow? We think about the bioeconomy and the recent instances that we've had to deal with the pandemic. And we realize suddenly that technology is not just a side consideration, but it actually is front and foremost in this global emerging 21st century, I would say, competition that is emerging between different views for how the world should essentially organize and order at a fundamental level.
Okay. All right. Well, Dr. Son, I forgot to mention that Edlyn, if I may call you so,
please.
She's a Harvard PhD, but she comes from a PhD from Stanford. Have you heard of the university, Stanford? So she's a Stanford
different
PhD.
color of crimson. Right?
Right. Anyway, Dr. Son, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Thank you, Professor Lee. As Professor Lee kindly explained, I came from Korea Institute of Science and Technology, called KIST, and that's the first government-funded research institute in Korea. The mission of KIST is always given by the government historically, and then when it was established, the mission was to save Korea from the poverty after the Korean War. So at the initial stage of the time, KIST planned for the heavy chemical industry of Korea. Also, KIST made the master plan for the currently POSCO, which is the steel industry, the major industries of Korea. The history of KIST, the research strategy of the KIST, is actually in line with the research strategy of the Korea in science and, in terms of the science and technology. So for now, currently, the biggest issue in Korea is, as Edlyn said, is align the technology with the geopolitical policies and also the diplomacy and some other issues, defense and so on. So that's why the President Yoon declared 12 national strategic technology last October. And actually, I was in this special committee to prepare for selecting these 12 technologies since last June. So President Yoon inaugurated in last May. So he started this work right after his inauguration. So if you see the list of the 12 strategic technologies, that's really in line with the technologies that just Edlyn said. And then you can find that they, in that special committee, actually it was very interesting because especially the committee that was organized by the Ministry of Science and Technology of ICT in Korea, MSIT, usually they just have expertise in the science and technology. But in that special committee, we have diplomats, and also the researchers from the defense, and also have some policymakers and so on. That means that they realize that these technologies are closely related to this whole entire societal structures. Especially now, so the mission of KIST is always to follow or make the innovation in Korea science and technology systems, and also make the forefront, frontier researches in there. So we are focusing to make the breakthrough in the technologies that we are working on among these 12 technologies. We do not cover all 12 because there's a space or the nuclear power in that 12. So, but and also we try to solve the problems as we are talking about the geopolitical issues here, about the global value chains and so on. Actually, the individual labs also affected by this GVC. I just heard a lot of Japanese-Korean conflict started 2019. We had this restriction on the export of the core material from Japan to Korea. And actually my lab suffered from that one. And also Ukraine war, I used the gas chemical that has the neon gas inside, and then the price just doubled, and then the shipment just was just prolonged for a long time. So as the research side, this is the kind of things that we are coping with this crisis and so on. And now as the director of the Policy Institute in KIST, we are searching for the solutions, how we can make the breakthrough in these 12 strategic technologies.
Thank you. Professor Yi?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lee. I'd like to thank the Korea Foundation and IHS Society Policy Institute for this opportunity. Great to be on this panel. For technology and trade, let me just underscore the importance of technology or technological alliance between Korea and the United States. Korea and the United States have, as you know, military alliance based upon 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty, and now economic alliance based upon 2012 Korea-US FTA, and now finally technology alliance, and the importance of which cannot be overstated, looking at what's happening globally and between two countries as well. So I think the alliance is now based upon tripod, if I could call it that way, or the trilogy of alliance is now going to a full-blown cooperation network between the two countries. I think this is what is meant by Foreign Minister Park in his opening address when he mentioned global, comprehensive, strategic alliance. I think this is what he tried to mean. So I think now United States and Korea are entering really important stage for the relationship between the two countries and globally as well. I think national security is a hot topic for any issue, be it trade agreements, investment agreements, inward investment, outward investment, technology. For every issue, national security is a very important issue, hot topic. At the center, I think economic security is situated. So national security is hot topic, and economic security constitutes the core elements of national security. And at the center of economic security, I think, lies the core technology and core technology cooperation. So technology cooperation between Korea and the United States is essential and indispensable for any matter of economic security dialogue, or for that matter, any discussion of national security discussion between Washington and Seoul. So in that respect, technology, core technology issues of dialogue between the two countries is critical and important. I think we are now in the right direction for many purposes. Responding to Professor Lee's question, I think what is critical for now is this. We now have common understanding and shared understanding, but still, it's a little bit too abstract. Cooperation is important. Collaboration is important. Dialogue is important. But next question is how and who. So we have to think about carefully about the actual framework to move this idea forward for the next step. We have a couple of ideas, we have a couple of frameworks already. Existing framework. Well, it's outdated a little bit, but Korea-US FTA has many dialogue mechanisms and committees, subcommittees, joint committees, etc. They have many technological components. It's a time to revive and revitalize those dialogue schemes to include these technological components into those dialogues, number one. And number two, we have many agency-to-agency arrangements already. As previously mentioned, we have agency-to-agency arrangements between Ministry of Science and Technology and U.S. counterpart, and Ministry of Environment of Korea and U.S. counterpart, and Ministry of Defense of Korea and U.S. counterpart, etc., etc. Those agency-to-agency instruments and arrangements need to be now updated and implemented in a way to kick this idea, move forward, so that the actual practical cooperation on core technologies can take place in the near future. And also, not only the existing framework, we can also think about future framework. IPF can be one idea. It's still on the drawing board. We have just completed the global value chain pillar recently, but there are other pillars that can fold technology into the discussions. So IPF could be another forum where the Korea-US technological cooperation can take place. But the problem with IPF is that it's multilateral. So it's difficult, I think. There will be difficulties for Korea and the United States to have a difficult discussions on technology dialogue in that IPF framework. So I think perhaps we could think about bilateral framework. Recently, Korea and Singapore concluded a digital partnership agreement, and the United States and Japan concluded digital trade agreement in 2019. Perhaps Korea and the United States may think about concluding similar bilateral digital agreement where many issues can be included, particularly how to implement the core technology cooperation that was just agreed between the two presidents in last April. In that respect, I think the next generation critical emerging technology dialogue has a great potential. It's to be headed by national security advisors by the two countries, which means it will be under the supervision of the presidents directly. So that, for the time being, that dialogue can be a meaningful tool for the two countries to think about core technology cooperation and collaboration and how to move this idea forward. So that will be the first step for U.S.-Korea collaboration and cooperation in core technologies. Again, I think the importance of technology cooperation in the context of national security and economic security is so important. And the alliance of the two countries is now based upon how we can succeed in completing this core technology cooperation for the next decade or so. Again, I think honestly, whoever controls core technology will have the hegemony in the upcoming digital society, digital trade, or digital economy. So that's why I think the core technology cooperation between Korea and the United States is so critical to the 7-year-old alliance between the two countries.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Son.
Yes, let me share a couple of my observations from the kind of industry perspective. So leaving bilateral or the economic security kind of topic. I think the first my observation is pretty much in the same vein with what Edlyn mentioned, because it's about supply chain. But these days we're talking about like supply chain resilience, and then and at the same time people talk about like reshoring, friendshoring. But I think it's all standing the opposite side of free trade. So I think eventually we're going to see some like decrease in the efficiencies. Those efficiencies that the whole industry, not just semiconductor, the whole world has been accumulated or built, throughout the free trade system. So people buy cheaper ones, and people make stuff at a cheaper location. But once economic security kicks in, then not just the cost. So people pick a location from different perspective. So the concerns, I don't have any solution for this observation, but the concerns that I have is, these kind of self-sufficiency, the supply chain management on the basis of the economic security, reminds me like two kind of potential, worrisome situation. One is trade remedy cases. Because I've been in the industry for 25 years. My early years in the semiconductor industry, my main job was dealing with anti-dumping cases, anti-subsidy cases for the company, and then because all those trade remedy disputes are coming from oversupply. But last 15, 20 years, I haven't seen any trade remedy cases in the semiconductor industry. I think it's because partially, maybe mainly, it's outcome of optimal allocation of the capabilities of all the chip makers. But now we're going back, and U.S. is emphasizing the importance of reshoring. Then probably we or they lose some of the efficiencies that we have built throughout the last couple of decades. Then so my worry is, I think we need to, or governments, industry needs to think about how to deal with oversupply situation comes again. And I think definitely we need to avoid those trade remedy cases among the like-minded countries. Probably all the reshoring or friendshoring will happen in the countries called so-called like-minded countries. Then when those oversupply situation comes, then I think it's quite inevitable to we see those kind of very time-consuming, labor requiring trade remedy cases. That's one kind of thing. And the second thing, because when people talk about economic security, and some level of governmental involvement is necessary. But that also reminds me some of my worries, coming from the U.S.-Japan semiconductor agreements entered in 1986. That is kind of an epitome of excessive governmental involvement. So I think, while we're achieving the efficiency, at the same time, securing the national security, economic security, I think we have to keep that in mind. So that the industry or the world do not repeat that, like something like U.S.-Japan semiconductor agreement. And then my next observation is about export control. It's not from the company's perspective, it's from the industry perspective. So the reason why I'm mentioning the export control is because I think to improve or to enhance the efficiency in the international technology competition or collaboration, I think we have to have a very transparent and mutually reasonable export control system, because most of the collaborations, technology collaborations, require some kind of export control aspect. So I think to do that, it's coming from my experience, because I'm when I look at the export control system of the major countries, I think there is no a structural, procedural commonality. It's very different. So it's hard to understand, and then means it takes more time to implement, it takes more time to understand. So I think WTO provides lots of a common skeleton to anti-dumping, those kind of stuff. So many member countries have a very similar procedural kind of structure. I think that help improve the efficiency and the innovation of the system. So I think that's one. And second, I see very few books about export control, very few classes, because I think we need more experts, people who are specialized in that topic. I think that slows down the innovation in that specific topic. So I think the deemed experts, I think people in the universities, when they work together with professors in other countries, always export control kicks in. But now it's very scattered around, and then there's no commonality. I think once we achieve those kind of commonalities, probably we see more innovation and quicker innovation in that area, eventually improve the efficiency in the international technology competition.
Thank you. What I will now do is I'll ask you more specific questions concerning bandwidth, in the sense that, is it possible to do all of the things we need to ensure that the ROK and the U.S. are able to forge a forward-looking technology alliance? So on paper, it all sounds great. We're going to cooperate on semiconductors, on space, on biotech, the next pandemic, and the list goes on. So my first question to you, Edlyn, is this. the U.S. is a superpower, but China is catching up, whether it's in AI or quantum or whatnot. My question to you is, as the U.S. seeks to maintain technological advancement vis-a-vis China, for example, can you keep harmony with your allies? How do you keep the interests of your allies, whether it's in the EU or in Asia, so that you are able to maintain this global coalition as you compete head-on with China?
That's a fantastic question.
You have like a minute and a half to answer this.
Okay. Keeping me on a very rapid cadence here. So I think that the success of technology collaboration with Korea, with allies, that also achieves the outcome that we seek with regard to, the perpetuation of a rules-based order, which I think is, the crux of what you're asking here, really is going to come down to an ability for democratic nations to, again, get this, what I talked about before, alignment between our private capital markets and our values. And that's where the technology also, fits directly within that, because if you don't control technology, you can't control the values. This also gets into aspects of economics, right, which you're talking about. When we think about, for example, policies like export controls and how they impact the economics of our companies, that's a very, very big aspect to consider. And so, the answer here is not going to be trivial, but I think that the nature of technology collaboration between the U.S. and its allies is going to require both at the foundational level of science, right, actually bringing scientists together, and to some degree, for scientists, what's wonderful, we grew up speaking different languages, but we learn the same language when it comes to science, right? Many scientists have this desire and ability to speak this language to each other, to actually pursue the frontier of knowledge. This is the attraction that we had to joining, the scientific workforce to begin with, is that we really, from the standpoint of humanity, we get to be the architects of science fiction, right? That we make science fiction a reality to a degree. But when it comes to then the economic impacts, that's where you start getting into the politics, that's where you get into the force projection. And to some degree, what I would like to see, right, more of in terms of the technology collaboration between the U.S. and South Korea in particular, but I would say the U.S. and its allies in general, is to actually solve a bit more this problem of how you take a good idea once it's actually proven out from a scientific point of view and actually project it onto A, economic outcomes for, frankly, democracies, and B, reflecting the values of those democracies. And I think that this is the area that we have not done as well as we should, right? And to some degree, like, the mention of WTO, right, to some degree, the U.S. has faced a challenge in the sense that the very rules-based order that we helped architect, of which the World Trade Organization is, a part, we have seen, a single player in particular leverage non-market forces in such a powerful way to capture the economic value of our innovations, and then use that potentially as a force, an economic force, to achieve, political outcomes, which is frankly unacceptable, and the rules-based order has not been able to respond quickly enough to, to those aspects. So a very specific example that I'll give is rare earth minerals, right? So if you're familiar with yttrium, as an example, China controls 99% of global yttrium. How did that happen? You look at the history behind this, and at a certain point, China was producing the raw minerals and raw ore in which you could extract the rare earth metals. But the Chinese government actually put an export tax on that raw mineral for Chinese companies to send it, outsource it for higher alloying and refinement. The reason they did that is they wanted to encourage their domestic industry to increase their value chain so that they would start doing that refinement inside China itself. This violated WTO laws, and the United States and a number of its allies sued within WTO. Maybe 12 years later or something, it was resolved. I don't remember the exact time frame. At that point, China had already captured the market, right? And so this is a real challenge. And so, when you ask what should the U.S. seek to achieve in terms of technology partnership with its allies. It is at the foundational level of collaboration, scientists with scientists. It is also then at the level of how is it as democracies that we continue to capture the value of the fruits of our scientific labor from an economic point of view, and then also from the ability to ensure that those technology outputs reflect our values. And if we're not able to figure out how to do that, we won't be successful. And I think this is just also my opinion. I think the United States would have a lot to learn from South Korea in this. Just another example, if we think that for example, projection of climate change is important, we need to figure out sustainable energy sources, the U.S. could learn from South Korea how to actually sustainably build a profitable, value-generating nuclear fission energy sector, right? South Korea is the only country, the only democracy that has been able to figure out how to do this sustainably. So, that's one of many. Semiconductor manufacturing, frankly, is another area we have a lot to learn from in terms of actually being able to manufacture in such a way that, is compliant chemically and environmentally, et cetera. So those are just ideas that I would put forward in terms of how the U.S. could do this.
I'm going to come back to you, Edlyn, because you went over a minute and a half. But there's an implicit assumption that scientists have a common goal or innate commonality, but political elements are crucial. And so how, for example, the U.S. government defines technology superiority doesn't always jive with what the Japanese or the Koreans or the French think, right? My question to you, Dr. Son, you work for a Korean think tank that's government funded. But why is it that Korea doesn't have, SpaceX type of companies? Of course, Hanwha is in aerospace. What I'm asking you is, of the 12 or so critical emerging technologies that the Korean government has now focused on for longer-term survival, how much of that is going to be dependent on people like you, or how much of that is going to be dependent on people like Mr. Son and others in the private sector? In other words, where does Korea's future innovation come from? Does it come from government-driven R&D, or does it come from the private sector?
Well, actually, that's really an important question.
You have also a minute and a half.
Oh, yeah, sure. As he mentioned, I think that he's just implying that Korea has been very strong in science and technology development because we had very strong government leadership in the R&D fund. So, as I mentioned, they kind of have this plan for the science and technology for every 5 years, and then they kind of get the opinion from experts, and then this is the next goal that we have to go. So that was initially steel industry, cement industry, and then so on in the mid-1900, and then after 1980, we had this fast follower strategy. So we mimicked the advanced technology of the U.S., Japan, and then get the technology inside us. The thing is that, after 2000, they started to, we had the good scientists actually get very well educated outside of Korea, and they came back to Korea. I actually initiated the key stories of the scientists coming back to Korea. But after 2000, we have this lump sum of the scientists who are very well educated from the advanced countries. And then they started to create the creative research wizard, which is like world first, world best, or something like that. And then that era, actually the government leadership is getting a little bit, the effective, effects of the influence of the government leadership is a little bit shrink down. But the thing is that, for the spaceship, like big science and then so on, we still need very strong government leadership, and also we need very huge fund.
Yeah.
But after 2000, Korea science and technology landscape changed to they spread the money to the basic science a little bit more, and then they kind of increase the creative thinkings and then the researches and so on. And then also, we have this strategy to have select and then concentrate our research fund to some specific research area, especially for the government fund. But space was not the first priority, I would say. Now, we are catching up. now we are catching up. So we have this successful launching of the Nuriho and then so on. So I think now the mood is already again changing because we are talking about strategic technologies, and then also about the politics and the democracy. I mean, also the collaboration with the other country, like-minded, and then also we have to deal with the relationship with China as well. In that case, actually the government leadership is gaining importance recently more, I would say. So maybe the policy in that direction will come into the picture.
Now, I want to come back to you and ask you a specific add-on, which is, if you look at Korea's demographic projections, it's terrible, it's horrible. We're falling off the cliff,
right,
and we're aging super fast. And so the fastest rising budget is social welfare and education, right? And our pension funds are going to basically go, like, not exist unless you reform it. So where do we get the money to innovate and create better R&D value? But I'll come back to you a little bit after this, right? Professor Lee, I know that you are a lawyer by training, and you have this economic portfolio that all sounds really terrific, because I don't know anything about the topics that you're an expert in. But my question to you is, as the government makes key choices on emerging technologies, the problem is everyone from the top president all the way down, none of them are really technology experts. So if you have to go in and tell the president, Mr. President, this is AI, this is quantum, this is new biotech, this is new hydro energy fuel, etc., and they've got to make really crucial decisions, investing billions upon billions, right? What do you do to educate policymakers on the critical arenas of technology?
That's a very difficult question. 1 minute and a half. A very difficult question. I think the problem for decision makers at this juncture is this. What you mentioned now is the complexity of technological issues, which is, of course, very complex. But now, when we talk about technology alliance or economic security, we are adding one more layer on top of it, which makes the issue more complex. For scientists, it's very complex now. For lawyers, it's a new terrain. For economists, I would say it's also a new landscape. For everybody, this is a new terrain, and that's why I guess everybody is struggling. And that's why, again, the advice from the advisors to the decision maker, be it president or prime minister in other countries, is very critical. That's why I think the role of the next generation core technology dialogue is important. That should be the liaison connection, who can talk to the scientists, who can talk to foreign ministry officials, who can also talk to defense ministry officials. Somebody needs to get hold of all this. And then somebody needs to know about the technology, what core technologies are, what is the strength of the United States, what Korea can do about it. And then there's a foreign policy component. And then there's a military issues coming in as well. So somebody needs to, not entirely, he doesn't have to be a lawyer, he or she doesn't have to be the scientist, but somebody needs to know all these issues together, combine them together, and converge all these issues together, and then make a wise policy decision. So that is the...
Yeah, you've just described ChatGPT. You know, so unless like...
Somebody who can monitor the ChatGPT.
Right, all right, so, all right, okay. Mr. Son, I mean, you know, you're from the private sector, from SK Hynix, one of the premier semiconductor makers of the world, in fact. Now, of course, companies are now in the front line of this technology war, whether you like it or not, right? You are not there at your own will, but you're there now because of the US-China trade wars or technology competition, the list goes on. At the same time, however, whose responsibility is it that you're so dependent upon the Chinese market? In other words, I go back to Edlyn's initial question. The whole idea that China will basically become this super big, nice Hong Kong has actually gone reverse. Hong Kong has become a small China, right? Rather than the hope that we all had that China would become a large Hong Kong. And so from your perspective, as you begin to look into new markets and lessen your dependence upon the Chinese market, where do you go?
Well,
besides India.
Yeah, because our product doesn't go to the consumers directly because it's mostly B2B. So we sell our product to the big companies like Google, Apple, and also some big companies in China as well.
Right.
So I don't think company has any intention to control or allocate the markets. I think we go where the customers are located. Okay. So, but under the U.S.-China disputes, relations is getting worse. We saw lots of new regulations and restrictions and sanctions, but I think they have not yet affected the selling side much. Most of the export controls, those new sanctions and regulations affected manufacturing side of the industry. But because China, they need phones, laptops, so it's all consumer product. So I think U.S. government and also Korean government are very careful about, I think trying to be very surgical in improving, in their efforts to improve national security and economic security. So we haven't tried or thought about finding another market instead of China because it's physically literally impossible because they need chips and we have to sell them. But if there is any concern to certain specific companies in China, in anywhere, I think each country has sanction program so that they can designate it certain companies. Then we have to be 100% in compliance with the sanctions, so we cannot, like Huawei. I think it's public information that no one is able to sell any semiconductor chips to Huawei because most of the probably 99, almost 100% of the semiconductor chips are using some of U.S. technology. So then the FDPR applies there. So, but other than those specific surgical restriction, I think we are still free to navigate the Chinese market, and it's our job to increase the revenue and serve the shareholders, right? So, yeah, I think that's my answer. Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for a few questions. Yes, sir, and please make it short. Yes, the gentleman in the back.
Thank you. It's a blessing to hear from you all. I wanted to make it short, but it's a question for you because the Carnegie Endowment wants international peace and security convergence. So I think it's a good dream to have. Can we just put all the 12 emerging technologies into a multinational fund that invests in them? I don't know who, what, when, where, how. Somebody's going to do it. But I know the why. We all want global peace. We don't want war. Similar to what you asked Professor Lee. I have a bit of Korean blood, a bit of Chinese blood in me, so it's just really tricky, this world, to navigate. And SK is really a family since a long time. So yeah, that's the question for you. Thank you very much.
All right. We'll take, yes, sir.
Question about the innovation ecosystem in Korea. Venture capital, how effective is it there? How big is it? Or is it only big corporations innovating? And if there is any sort of open innovation relationship between smaller companies and larger companies? Thank you.
Dan, did you have a question? No? Okay. All right. Yes, two gentlemen in the back, and then we'll end it then. Okay.
Vice President Son, you brushed by the question of Plan B. We well know from the Ukraine what happens when one big power invades another and war breaks out. what is SK Hynix going to do if something happens in the South China Sea, in Taiwan Straits, the East China Sea? What's your plan?
Yes, finally, last question. The gentleman in the corner.
Thank you. So there was a lot of talk about investing toward the future in core technologies, but maybe there are some technologies that are so disruptive to the economy and to culture that we can't invest our way out, but we have to actually regulate. And so this could be, for example, the Korean content production industry, which is potentially totally undermined by generative AI and the training on intellectual property. So what kind of regulatory approaches are you seeing to some of these emerging technologies in Korea, and how do you see that playing out?
Thank you. Now, Dr. Lee, I want you to answer the question that was asked to me. Why? Because it's too difficult as a moderator. so you have to answer that question. Do we need a global fund to generate innovation in Korean R&D? Plus, do we need more regulation or less?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Well, funding is an issue. Of course, we can think about getting private funding or government-private mixture, the mixed funding. So we can think about many different ways. But I think at least for now, any funding issue should be dealt with by the government side. So when we talk about the collaboration and coordination, cooperation, it should be government-to-government cooperation and companies-to-companies cooperation. And there's government-companies cooperation as well between two countries. So at least at the end of the day, we need funding from the private side, at least mixed funding between the government, public funding, and private funding. But for now, at least to get these activities started, the funding should be formed from the government, practically speaking. With respect to the questions for the intellectual property protection for certain contents in the Korean market, as we have more exposure to the digital contents, intellectual property protection is a big issue everywhere, particularly in Korea. So Korea is now amending domestic laws and regulations recently, and they are all geared toward protection of IPRs in the Korean market. And more importantly, Korea is more now focused on protecting Korean contents abroad, as opposed to the enhancement of protection of the foreign contents in Korea, which is, of course, the legal obligation for Korea. But now Korea's focus is to how to protect the Korean contents in other jurisdictions. So that is the regulatory change. Less regulation, more regulation. I think we have to find the balancing point. There is the problem of more regulation, as Vice President Son mentioned. As governmental intervention and support gets higher and deeper, there's the problem of stifling innovation and competition in the market. I think that's a fundamental problem of exploring this cooperation between the public side and private side. So overregulation is always something that we should caution against. With that, I think at least some balancing point for proper regulation is critical. And that is also one element of Korea-US cooperation. Korea has adopted many new regulations for ICT companies. I understand there are concerns from the United States for the new regulation of Korea on the ICT part. So they are something that two countries can cooperate and discuss to find the right balancing point for proper regulation. Thank you.
VP Son on Taiwan.
Yes.
You should really talk to Allison because she knows all this stuff. So,
so right after your question, I'm still thinking about it. What could be the right answer? But I think it's well beyond Hynix's pay grades. The potential disruption in Taiwan Straits and what's our plan or strategy. I think it's not a matter that one company can prepare. I think it applies to all the companies in the world. I think there is a possibility. It is what it is. So I think companies trying to, I would call it like strategic equilibrium, maybe, like all the right allocation, so that in case of any disruption, not just in Taiwan, anywhere, trying to protect our own supply chain and operation efficiency. But we haven't. Maybe somewhere, some people at the HQ is still thinking about it. But I think, to my understanding, we never had that. We never had discussion about that specific topic. How to deal with the potential disruption in Taiwan Strait. So, but I think to achieve overall efficiency of the company's operation, I think that's one element. But I don't think we can come up with any robust plan to deal with that kind of that big disruption in that reason.
Well, this tells you how much the world has changed. We have a businessman talking like a diplomat. But that's okay. So, last but not least, I want to give the final 2 words to our 2 scientists. So, Dr. Son, what is your final thought on managing and growing and sustaining a U.S. ROK technology partnership or alliance?
Well, for the global cooperation, my philosophy is that if you have the same expertise, then you two become very good friends, but there's no innovation. So you should have expertise in the complementary way. So, for example, I told you that Korea was suffered from the Japanese ban export for the core materials. At that time, we had learned a really costly lesson. So we actually developed our own material domestically. I thought that that was possible in Korea because we have this manufacturing capability. We still have this capability, but we didn't do that because of the cost effectiveness. But we still possess it, and then now the U.S. have material, and then also have a lot of advanced science, fundamental science, and every aspect of spectrum of the OD know-hows, especially AI, quantum science. They are have really big leap ahead of other countries. And then if we collaborate, if we want to collaborate and make a really strong collaboration, then we need to find which is the complementary part that we can collaborate and make the synergy together. So I think this is really important for us to find out, especially for the scientists, because scientists, we are always open. We communicate with each other.
No, you're not always open.
My jacket is open, but anyway. So we communicate a lot, and we have discussion over the conference, and then sometimes they refuse to publish the papers in the articles that is not open to the public. They have this open platform for some of the publications. So I think we want to do that. But as you said, now is the era that we need maybe some of the regulation for some technologies, or also about the collaboration, we need some boundary conditions as well. I don't think the naivety really help for the era like this, this present situation.
Edlyn, you have the final word.
Oh boy, that's big. First and last. I'll try to bookend this. What I might add to the dialogue actually is yes, a perspective as a scientist, but also now as an investor. So these discussions about investment, creating funds and startups and so forth. One of the most important aspirations on the part of scientists and technologists. Yes, there is the frontier of discovery, but there's also taking what you have discovered and building something new. Right? When you are an entrepreneur, when you're a founder of a new company, you fundamentally have a different vision for the way the world works, right? We're all going to drive electric vehicles. We're all going to, have, I don't know, space tourism or things like that. You have a different vision for the way that the world works. And I think that together for the United States, for South Korea, this idea of enabling our visionary creative class to actually take their innovations and move them across what is typically called the valley of death, right, from where you actually have made that first breakthrough and where you actually have commercial reality and market traction. And this is one important ingredient which we've underemphasized, I think, on the panel, which is access to risk capital, venture capital, and the right type of venture capital. I'm not only talking about venture capital that's investing in the next dog walking app. I'm talking about venture capital that's actually invested in the types of technologies that are foundational, frontier technologies that are the foci of both of our countries, and that can actually enable that type of scaling. And the United States has a long history of this. I've seen with South Korea an incredible rise in terms of venture capital investment. I think South Korea hit 20 unicorns and counting. Yeah. Something tremendous. And so as we think about this, and there's been a lot of concern and issues that we've raised on both panels. Many things to be concerned about. But perhaps to close, what I would say is don't forget about the optimism, about the dreamers, about those in our countries and societies who are trying to build a better future for all of humanity. And let's collectively figure out how to invest in and enable them.
I think those are really, really wise words. Let me once again thank the audience as well as our online audience who are going to be watching this either today or in video format. My final comment is this. 70 years ago, if somebody told me or told someone who was older than me that, in the year 2023, a Korean company or many Korean companies would invest billions of dollars and build factories in the U.S. on super high technology, you would have been laughed out of the room. But 70 years later, that's reality. And that happened because precisely the U.S. actually supported us throughout the war and after the war and created, in fact, you paid money to create KIST. So it really is a complementary relationship that really has come full circle. And so I think managing that full circle in the next 20, 30 years as geopolitical tensions intensify really means that we need really smart diplomats, better analysts, corporations who are able to make markets function in a very different way, policymakers who know technology inside and out, R&D folks who are really able to work with the private sector, and of course, venture capitalists who are not all that hungry, but also are mindful of humanity in general. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention and for a great panel.